So basically, in an open admission shelter, anything and everything that can happen to an animal is going to walk through that door. Welcome back. So for the next part of our animal welfare rundown, we're going to talk about where all of these animals come from and how they enter the shelter. So if you recall in a previous episode on the different kinds of animal shelters, we talked about the difference between municipal and nonprofit shelters. So the type of shelter is greatly going to influence what kind of things that we're going to see come into the shelter. So if you'll remember, municipal shelters are open admission. So that means that they have to say yes to anything coming in if it's under their jurisdiction or it falls under certain governmental protocols. So they also manage all of the animals that come in through animal control. On the other side, nonprofits have a little bit more leniency on what they see come in. It's going to be much more controlled because they can decide what they take into their shelter. So depending on what kind of contracts they have with surrounding hospitals, they might see a good amount of traumas. Generally, they're not going to take anything that is super critical. So the most critical things they might take are going to be things like parvo. They might take some like hit by cars as far as if they're somewhat stable, like the emergency hospital has been able to stabilize them and maybe they have a broken leg or something, but they are out of the woods for the most part. So they're going to take things that are, less high stakes and need a little bit like they don't need round the clock care. So their intakes are going to be decidedly less intense because they're going to make decisions about what they bring in based on the eventual ability of that animal to be adopted. They are essentially money spent versus money gained from an adoption. They're also looking for good stories that are going to get them more support from donors in the form of money. It is something I really had to come to terms with when working for a nonprofit and realizing that they, even though they are a nonprofit, they are businesses and they need money to do what they do. But it was really difficult to see some decisions made where like I knew, or from what I had seen before, that the potential of treating those animals and getting them cleared and adopted was, possible, but then saying no to them just because it might not happen. So that was really difficult for me. I'd like to say the decisions of what to bring in are also centered on like capacity of care for the staff. So if we were understaffed, maybe we wouldn't say yes to some things that we might otherwise have, just to make it so our staff was not, burnt out as quickly. I only saw that happen maybe like once in my time at a nonprofit. So I don't think it is a leading factor when they are making those decisions, but I think it should be if you have the capability to do that. Generally, nonprofits are going to make decisions based on money, and they are going to make decisions on what is a good story and what could eventually be adopted that we can charge money for. So I'm kind of going to go off of a lot of the things I saw when I worked at an open admission no-kill shelter. Everything that we see in any kind of shelter really runs the gamut. So we see all kinds of breeds, purebred Persians, purebred Huskies, Pit Bulls, and Chihuahuas usually hold the majority still. Pit Bulls mainly because of breed bans that exist still. So a lot of times Pit Bulls that are banned in one municipality may be transferred to one where they are not banned, so that's going to greatly increase the amount of those in the shelter. But we've seen Great Danes, Dalmatians, German Shepherds, Dachshunds, Frenchies, all of the breeds you can think of I've seen in the shelter. Also ages, so we'll see anything from newborn neonate puppies and kittens to 15-year plus senior pets, and they're all of varying health status. So you could see like completely healthy seniors that have been taken care of and don't really have anything going on, to really, really critically ill newborn puppies and kittens. A lot of shelters will also cater to small mammals, so bunnies, guinea pigs, mice. They could also have reptiles like lizards and snakes. A lot of shelters are going to have some kind of holding area for non-companion animals. So those are going to be your pigs, goats, chickens, roosters, things like that. So they will have a place to house them for whatever they need to do as far as like legal matters or anything like that, but usually they're going to be pretty quickly transferred to rescue partners who specialize in those things. And then some animals come to us completely healthy and some come to us on the brink of death. There are two aspects I want to talk about with this topic. So we're going to start with the category of strays and those brought in through animal control. So strays can be brought in by anyone who finds an animal roaming around their city. Person who brings a stray into the shelter called like Good Samaritan. I'm truly in awe of some of these people who have brought in strays to the shelter because, you know, it's people who have stopped on the side of the road for a huge dog that can't even walk and somehow has gotten them into their car, taken the time to drive them to the shelter and make sure that they're getting cared for. So I am highly grateful to those people. I don't know how you do it, but good on you. They're gonna either be relatively healthy and obviously owned because they're gonna come up to a person and like want to interact with them. So that's one side of it. The other side is they're going to have something wrong with them that makes it impossible for them to run away from the person. Maybe they are hyperthermic, maybe they are down and hind is what we call, where they can't stand up and walk, or they're gonna be really, really sick where they can't, you know, get up and move. So for example, several dogs I've seen over my time have been, you know, wagging their tail, happy, you know, taking treats, licking faces, but they just can't stand up. Some of those will end up having fractures in their spine. Some of them will have like really bad arthritis or something where they've just kind of like blown out their back. You know, some have been hit by cars, but not to the point where it's like they were hit on their chest or their stomach or anything, so they are fine, and maybe they just like dislocated or fractured their pelvis. So strays can really come in from anyone. Animal control will also bring in strays if people have called them because there's an animal running around their neighborhood. When they get a call like that, a field officer is going to respond and attempt to catch that animal. On the topic of animal control, most of what they're going to bring in is something that is injured. It's something that is injured and likely needs immediate medical care. So the most common thing I've seen with animal control has been animals that are hit by cars. Usually they receive a call from someone who has just seen it happen or who has found the animal like on the side of the road pretty quickly after they were hit. A lot of times it's like impossible to know if they were actually hit, and we're just going off of like where they were found and what injuries they have, and so we're assuming they were hit by a car. Animal control might also bring in animals that are found to be attacking a person or another animal, or a person will see a stray animal being attacked, or their personal pet is attacking a stray animal or something like that. A lot of animal control cases are going to be things with like fractures of varying degrees, wounds of some kind, either fresh or really infected and gross, or any other internal injuries caused by any of those events. It gets a little dicey when you're dealing with animals running loose, because if they don't have any other identifying tags or anything, you're going to assume it's a stray. A lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's a dog who belongs to someone, has gotten loose, and has no microchip or tags or anything, and no one knows who the animal belongs to. We will see some crazy things with like people just reacting to a situation before they're able to call animal control. So one unique case that I was part of helping with was there was a German Shepherd who was you know, like 7 or 8 months, so he's still a puppy, but like an older puppy, and he was running loose and he ended up attacking a small dog in a yard, and the owner was reacting, trying to save his pet, and ended up stabbing the German Shepherd. We weren't made aware really of the circumstances surrounding the situation. Like, you hear rumors through the shelter grapevine, but you don't really know what's true or not, so we just have to focus on caring for the German Shepherd while administration and animal control and like the legal team and everything is dealing with everything surrounding that. We are just caring for the German Shepherd, who was pretty lucky because even though he was stabbed in his back, it didn't do any real damage to his spine. So it was just healing that wound. Animal control will also be called for instances where an owner may have died and had animals in the home and the family can't the person might not have any family, or the family can't take on those pets, so we need to care for those pets in whatever state they're in. They'll also be called to situations where the police might have been involved. So it may be that the police were called to a non-animal related call, like a domestic disturbance or something like that, and then the pet on the premises is being aggressive or actively attacking the people or the police officers. Again, while we're not given the complete story, we're often treating animals who have had some kind of injury done to them in that instance. So they could have been tased, or they could have been shot, either by police or someone else. And whether they meant to shoot that animal or not, that animal comes to our clinic and we have to respond accordingly and do whatever we can to help that animal. So the final thing that comes through animal control is animals that are seized for suspected cases of abuse, neglect, or active cruelty. Those animals undergo really intense physical exams, as much as they will allow, obviously, behavior-wise. And then everything is documented on those animals. Every kind of little thing that you can think of in terms of their physical well-being is documented in files. They will also normally have special handling precautions and things like that for the animal care techs, and everything again is usually documented and monitored while they're in the shelter. So these can be cases of hoarding, abandonment, or active abuse. So I did assist with a couple hoarding cases, seizure of a dog fighting ring. It is difficult because some of these animals may come to us already deceased, and then the vets will do what is basically an autopsy to try and discover what may have been the cause of death for that animal. Regular vets are not trained to do that kind of investigation. Like, there is specific training you can go through as a vet for that kind of thing to somewhat accurately determine cause of death. So our shelter vets are just kind of doing the best they can with what they are given, and they can say this was likely starvation or likely, wound or something like that. So they're doing the best they can to kind of discover that, and then they're giving that information to the legal team and animal control to press charges if they desire to do that. So the neglect and abuse cases are really difficult, but those a lot of times will come through animal control, and we have to make sure we are caring for those animals, but also documenting everything just in case things end up going to trial, because unfortunately these animals are technically evidence for that. So we need to document everything and make sure that we are not only caring for them and getting them better, but recording everything that happened to them as far as we can see. Animal control is also going to be handling any bite cases. So if an animal was running loose and they bit a person and drew blood, then that animal would be taken into custody and quarantined, and then everything happens with that. So you are going to have, a lot of times the bite might not have been serious, but you are going to have very, very aggressive animals that you can't even touch, not just because they're on bite quarantine, but because they won't let you. So you do have those behavioral things. And then behavior comes with any kind of illness or injury that comes in as well. So a lot of animals might be in a lot of pain and won't let you do a lot, and need sedation to handle and address those issues. Not only are you seeing a wide variety of medical issues, you're seeing a wide variety of behavior as well. So really, with the category of Good Samaritan strays and animal control, you're going to see more of your traumas and illnesses that are the result of lack of care, whether that be through active abuse and neglect or from just being a stray for so long. So in the case of being a stray, it's impossible for us to know how long these animals have been on the streets, because a lot of people do not keep their animals tagged. They might not microchip them. So it's impossible to know unless someone comes in and claims them, or they are microchipped or tagged. When we are confronted with something like that, we just assume that they are a stray, and they have been a stray for however long it has taken to manifest whatever condition they're in. I'll give you an example of something that's like, it's been a stray for so long that this thing has gone untreated. Where I lived before I lived in Arizona, heartworm was a really prevalent thing. So we would see a lot of animals come in as strays in active, advanced heart failure from untreated heartworm. So heartworm is completely preventable and treatable if you have access to vet care and you're caring for that animal the way they tell you with preventative and things like that. So we just assume these dogs have not been cared for in any way as far as like given preventative, and then however long they're running the street with heartworms, then that's going to exacerbate that, accelerate the process. And we'll talk about heartworm in a different video, but that is one example of something that is treatable and preventable that is just exacerbated in the stray population. So basically in an open admission shelter, anything and everything that can happen to an animal is going to walk through that door. The second category of intakes is owner surrenders. Now, I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings about why a person would choose to surrender their pet. I know that before working in this field, I had a lot of feelings about that. I have since kind of been able to open my mind to a lot of the reasons why this would happen, although I still have some really deep-held opinions about it. Again, my mind has been opened a lot, and I've seen a lot of things a lot of crappy situations that, it is just for the best. So let's break it down. If the people live within the jurisdiction of the shelter, an owner can make an appointment to surrender their personal pet. Most shelters have a form that those owners fill out where they are going to list why they are surrendering the pet, and that can range from not having enough time for the pet to a severe medical illness that they don't have the resources to handle. Some of them can be behavior issues, some of them can simply be that they're moving, really any reason a person can give. Those are the most common reasons I've seen. I've seen some crazy ones where a couple is getting a divorce and they just can't decide who gets to keep the pet. I've seen people surrendering animals that have been given to them as a gift that they had no input about. I've seen dogs surrender because they accidentally knocked a child over but didn't do any other harm to it, and the parents are just so offended by that they are going to cast the dog out. Now, of course, there are real behavior issues that people might surrender their animals for, and those are like heading down that road to a real bite even if they haven't reached that point yet. Another reason I saw was that people have lost their housing and they don't have any way to care for that pet where they are going. So maybe they're couch surfing and they don't have a stable home, and the people they're staying with can't have the animal there. Unfortunately, that was a big thing during COVID where people were losing their jobs or losing their housing because of all the stay-at-home stuff, and their jobs weren't able to give them support in order for them to keep their housing, and so then they were having to surrender their animals, unfortunately. So that was a huge one, and it was really difficult time. As far as those without housing, a lot of shelters have also put into place programs where they will find foster homes for those specific animals to stay until the original owner can find stable housing. So that was a huge program that was put into place by one of my previous shelters that helped a lot of people. So shelters are always looking for new programs and ways that they can get those animals back into those homes, and it's just constantly working with what we have available and what funds we have and what we can devote to new programs and support from the community to do those things, whether that's through money donations or foster homes. So on the medical side, the most common reason we see people surrendering their pets is for a health issue that they don't have the money to treat and manage. So some of these issues can be things like chronic kidney disease requires special food, multiple vet visits, sometimes like very involved at-home care. Diabetes obviously requires like very expensive insulin and syringes and multiple vet visits until they're at a level where they're controlled. Heart failure requires like a whole list of medications, and then sometimes they might need advanced imaging like an echocardiogram. As much as an owner might be wanting to give their pet, money is always going to be an issue. So even if they want to do all those things for their pet, if they can't do that financially, then they might want to surrender to a shelter. And then they might have already paid a lot of money even getting to the point of a diagnosis, much less all of the stuff that comes afterwards to help manage it. A lot of those appointments to get to the diagnosis might have gone through an emergency hospital, which is even more expensive than a general practice. So some shelters have put programs into place where owner can apply to possibly reclaim their surrendered pet once they've undergone treatment. I've seen that for things like injuries or illnesses like parvo. The owner does have to apply, and they will be put on a program for repayment and things like that. So some shelters do have that, but again, it's kind of a case-by-case basis and depends on the situation. Now, I'm not here to judge why anyone would want to surrender a pet. I'm not here to judge what is a valid reason and what isn't. However, I will say I do get frustrated sometimes with some of these situations. I get frustrated when people decide to adopt a puppy and then they get it home for a month and realize it's a lot of work and they don't want to deal with that and then bring it back. I feel like you didn't think that through. And maybe you could have just fostered for 2 weeks and then came to that realization and nothing would be wrong. And it doesn't even have to be just a puppy, just any pet people will get and in the heat of the moment and then realize like this is too much. So it just puts a lot of stress on the animal to go out and come back in, especially if that happens to the same animal multiple times. I also get a little frustrated with a lot of these chronic older pets. A lot of times we will have owners come to the shelter to surrender their pet of 15 plus years who has been diagnosed with something terminal and have been told by their private vet that it's probably time to say goodbye. But they will come to the shelter looking to surrender their pet because, like, in the hopes that we will do something differently. And I will just tell you that if your vet is recommending that, that's probably going to be the decision we come to as well. I know it's really hard to make that decision. Believe me, I've watched vets make that decision multiple times all day long, and then when it came to my personal pet, I was a complete wreck. I do understand that, but it's my opinion and it's only my opinion. If this was the case, you would request euthanasia services over surrendering the pet. I would hope that the owners would opt to say goodbye on their own terms rather than putting their pet of so many years through the stress of, going through the shelter system and being in a kennel in general population and not knowing what's going on and feeling crappy. As shelter workers, we will obviously love them and spoil them and do as much as we can to make their, last days the best that we can, but we are still strangers and the shelter is still a terrifying place for them, and it's just not fair. So I have a lot of respect for people who come to the shelter specifically for euthanasia reasons. So these owners have come to terms with this decision and they're making it on their own terms. So a lot of shelters do offer low-cost euthanasia services. It's going to be more accessible for a lot of people in the community, and they're going to have memorial options. So whether that's like ink paw prints they make there, or if they are partnered with another memorial service for other things like private cremations and things like that, they have those options. So not only are they providing those services, but the fees for those services go directly into being able to do that for their community. Again, I know it's a hard decision, but I truly believe it's easier for the animal to go in the room for a final time with their person rather than going out into general population in the shelter environment before being surrounded by strangers when it is their time to go. I can definitely understand when you are between a rock and a hard place and trying to make the best decision for your animal because you want something better for your pet. And I will say a lot of times with owner surrenders, there will be an option to receive a callback, which is where if we have done testing and we have come to the decision that this animal is not an adoption candidate, whether it's like a medical reason or behavior reason, they are usually to the point where the vet is going to recommend euthanasia, then the owner has the option to receive a call and potentially reclaim their pet and seek out other options for them. If it is a medical issue, we are only going to provide so much medication. Usually it's going to be about 2 weeks of stuff, so then they have to follow up with their private vet to, proceed with care and treatment and things like that. So it's difficult if like you surrender your pet and knew something was wrong but didn't know exactly what was wrong, and then you come to find out it's a chronic disease that needs, intense management and things like that. I feel like the callbacks are useful for giving those owners some kind of peace of mind to know that like we did everything that we can to figure out what's going on, and this is what we're recommending. And if that's not feasible for the shelter and it's not feasible for them, then euthanasia is usually the best outcome, especially if it's an advanced situation. So like really advanced heart failure, terminal cancer. All shelters I've been a part of have offered that opportunity for the owners to reclaim if they want to. So that is a relatively quick rundown about all the things that could walk through a shelter's doors. I will have some story times in the future about some cases. We'll go in depth and talk about different illnesses and injuries and what we do as far as shelter medicine goes for those versus a private practice or an emergency clinic. Again, we see anything and everything walk through the doors, and everyone on staff goes all out in trying to care for them and heal them and get them to a point where they can be happy, healthy, and adopted out into a forever home. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.